I'd just like to ask both of you about your kind of first response to this, just to the landscape itself, really, and is it reminiscent of anywhere else that you've worked or lived, or?
Well, we had an immediate attracted to it. It's fairly unique for me. I mean, I've never lived off an estuary before or done any kind of river living. You, Steve Barnes?
No, not really. I mean, I'm small boat fish. I live in Florida, so I am close to rivers, and the Gulf is there, but it's not the same as.
It's not a way of life.
No,
it's like, there's the recreational
yeah,
spot.
there's recreation.
It's not like what Graham's talking about.
These people live here. They live the sea. They live. I mean, this is it at one time was a fishing village. It was a fishing community that survived off of the industry that's no longer here, at least on that scale. So yeah. I've never seen anything quite like that.
No. So ecologically and sociologically, it's just fascinating to us. And since we had the opportunity of Graham and Matsuko being fully embedded and invested in this community, where we really had insider information we could work with, and and access to an extreme amount of local knowledge. You're gonna take that valuable. I mean, that's like a true resource and asset that doesn't come your way every day. And when you see an opportunity like that, you go with it. And as Graham was describing, so not only do we have that kind of professional layer, but we had this other layer of a very close relationship for these two over a long time in a series of projects that had gone really well. So it seemed like the right place to be.
Can I ask you to describe exactly what the projects are that you're working on?
The one that we're doing now.
Yeah. The estuary connected projects.
Well, it's just one. It's just, believe me, this boat is like all one person, one team of people. Yeah, you're standing in it. Would ever want to handle. But one of the things that is very apparent, even if you're a novice like me and Steve Barnes, when you get here, is the disappearance. The incredible amount of that disappeared, and when you start talking to people and having them tell stories, what they mostly tell you a story about is the disappeared, what used to be, what was happening, what's not around anymore, and it's a shame. And so it just seemed like, Graham's already kind of gathering these stories. It's like, why not put them together? And we had come off, Critical Art Ensemble, we had come off doing a series of projects, this might be the last one in the series, of doing anti-monuments, of how do you make a monument that, rather than creating a smooth ideological space in which all people are expected to feel and believe in the same way, how do you do one instead that accounts for difference and allows for the contradictions and conflict of history, and to let all those different voices speak out? And so that was kind of the project we wanted to make, and because the voices are all different here, man. This it might be a community, but there's not unity of story. The stories do not all go together. There are vastly different interpretations of what's going on, and it's how do you accommodate all those interpretations? And
please tell me.
Well, we're collecting them up. We're collecting them up, and they will be inscribed into this boat. And we wanted to do the opposite of the general monument, in which normally you start with a big chunk of stone and you go, this is going to last forever. And we're going the exact opposite. It's like, let's use some really precarious material and object that's going to come apart, just like our memories, to try and align it with real subjective memory, which is fragile and disappears and doesn't and changes over time. And that's what this boat will do once we reinscribe it with these stories and then put it back out on the marsh. It'll, instead of being an oppressive, giant stone to bother people for the next 1,000 years, it'll be an ever-changing series of narratives that will decompose over time.
It's making me think of, Rachel Whiteread's house project and how that was built, as a kind of absence and a memory of a space, and then it became hugely popular, and then there was great controversy around the demolishing of the work. And I just wonder, I can imagine this also becoming hugely popular and the council wanting to save it and preserve it and fix it somehow. What do you feel about if that happened?
That would be bad.
Yes, exactly.
That would ruin the work.
So the whole point of it is that it.
Yeah, the whole point is that it's going to evolve and change over time. That it's not going to be a fixed object. It's going to be like memory. It's going to evolve. And evolve in a certain way, that these things will work, and the physical object and the ideation of it will work in parallel. So if you go and all of a sudden they make some custodial plan, it would ruin it, because then it would turn it into exactly what we don't want it to be. It would turn into the singularity of perspective that would ruin it in every sense. Ruin it in terms of process, ruin it as an object, and ruin it as an idea. So no, I wouldn't like it.
No, it would be far better that the young people of Essex go out there and burn it.
Yeah, that would be great.
Much more fitting.
Yeah.
Than the council trying to preserve it.
No, I can imagine it happening. But
the burning?
No, not the burning. Not the burning.
Okay. Yeah. So it's Graveyard of Lost Species, and that project is really about. Or the stories. Firstly, there's this boat which belongs to Ian Slater, so it belongs to someone. Who is Ian Slater? Ian Slater is a local. He's a local kind of boat owner, along with his brother, and he's owned this boat since 1976.
Was it an operating Borley boat then?
Before then. From 1963 to 76, it had been converted into kind of like, people being able to sail about on it. Before that, it was a working Borley, in Southend from 1933 when it was made. And the thing is that it's like, a really important thing about this is that it would cost about $500,000 to put it back together. So it's impossible for everyone, to do such a thing. And so rather than, she was dying out there in the marsh. She'd been out there 7 years buried in the marsh. And so by suggesting to Ian that, because for Ian, you have to think about a boat like this, not so much as that it's in a state, but for him, when he was doing grotty building jobs, this was his imagination. This was what carried him. You know what I mean? On all those journeys when he's under a floorball trying to get a bit of electric flex, you know what I mean, underneath. This boat carried him away and enabled him to...
Is that because he had a desire to rebuild the boat at some point?
Yeah,
or
he always had it. He was trying to keep it up, but it's an enormous boat to keep up. You can't do it on your own. And there was an industry, behind keeping these boats going, which has gone. So what do? Do you give it to someone like ultra rich to kind of restore it and take it away, and then it wouldn't be the possession of everyone? Or do you allow it to die gracefully? And everyone,
and meaningfully.
And meaningfully, yeah. And when I started to suggest, because at first we were going to pull some planks out of another wreck and engrave on those, but when it come to it, the idea of taking this. And I told the blokes in the hut that are not the most poetic people in the universe, the cocklers, but they really, really got it. They really got that this would give her, a kind of send-off.
Dignity.
A dignity. Yeah. And also that, they could talk about the things they wanted to. And a really important part in that story was when Boris was doing the airport thing, and he was going, no one lives here. And when they're doing the conservation zone, when they're doing the London Gateway, no one lives here. And all the stuff that they put forward in all the meetings is always quantifiable. It's always about models that they've created of the seabed and of everything else. And all the knowledge that people have gained through working here and living here, for generations is missing. So how can you represent those kinds of memories, understandings, kinds of thinking into the realm of governance? How can you there is, and the way that I thought, standing there on the beach working on my old boat, was art is probably an amazing method of being able to bring that to prominence. And just the council trying to situate this boat somewhere, once it's inscribed with all these memories, thoughts and reactions, you know, to this, to what's gone, becomes loaded. So for me, it's a way of like Southend Council can't ignore a 40-foot, 12-ton boat that they need to situate somewhere with all this stuff loaded in it. And also that the people working on it and giving their stories, from the Belton Way Small Craft Club, the cocklers, you know, people in the yard, people that live here in little huts. There's some people that live here in containers, some people in caravans, some people on the mud, all adding in their stories. So I think Steve says, you know, basically it's the kind of dispossessed. You know, the cocklers are not, they're barons.
Yeah, they're doing okay.
They're doing okay, but everyone else that's kind of lost, you know, all the small boat fishermen, the inshore fishermen, the people doing the pots, you know, all the people that were doing the prawns that are now gone, you know, all those kinds of things. It means that, you know, you value those memories and those contradictory beliefs and ideas about the estuary, and you give it the kind of complexity and difficulty in understanding, but you bring that into an object and then say to the council, well, this is it. And the practice of wrecking your boat, putting your boat on the mud and leaving it there to die, it's really old. It's a way of keeping your memories. You know, people go and pick bits off, but people know most of the wrecks that are in living memory. They know them by name, they know who sailed them, and they remember them. So we're kind of like, so all of these different things come together in these old pieces of wood. What I'd like to ask you about, I mean, you're writing this book, have you got a title yet?
Yes.
Can you tell us?
I can. It's called Estuary, a deep exploration of place.
And each part you've recorded on boats, isn't it?
For the most part, so it kind of started off for me. You know, I kind of grew up here my whole life, but wasn't a boaty person at all. And then 5 years ago, I was asked to be the kind of writer in residence on a kind of experiential cruise along the Thames Estuary for 5 days in a Thames barge, no, a Dutch barge actually, which I did, and it completely changed my experience and kind of understanding of the place where I live, to be kind of immersed in the landscape, and you know, just being a extremely nosy person, it just made me very kind of curious, you know, about the water, the stories of this place, you know, this kind of awareness, the emptiness of the river seemingly when we were travelling up and down, and just it made me think about, you know, like who uses the water now, who has used the water, what are all those disappearing trades. You know, a lot of my work is about disappearances, normally urban ones, and people's kind of working lives really. So the focus of the book has been a series of journeys on the water on different vessels, and a huge amount of oral history interviews with, you know, people like Brum who know the place really well, have spent their working lives on the river. So those kind of stories really inform the book. So I've had lots and lots of interviews, you know, with bargemen and tugmen and bullymen and lots of men. Just trying to get some.
You need Maxco, who seems to have run off.
Yes, I do. I said that to her on the phone because you know, it's a struggle to find women's voices, particularly when you're talking you need historically, you know, within living memory and kind of 20th century.
There's other questions though, like when we was on the train, and we were talking about it, and you spoke really eloquently about the struggles with the book and how like because it is so complicated, so many scales of stuff at the same time, and then how would you, and so can you describe a bit about how you're having to deal with that? Because you said to me it was you couldn't do a historical narrative.
No, absolutely not.
So can you describe?
Well, I think that this very interesting thing has happened as I started to write it, and also I suppose my practice, I'm known to be in that kind of genre of psychogeography, which relates to the idea of the drift on foot. And of course, when you're on a boat, you're actually drifting, and you're drifting through time and space in a really different way than if you're walking. And there's something about that movement, that drift, and the deep amount of research into the stories of this place that's just constantly overlapped. So I'm kind of describing this coastline, and you're moving between time periods in a crazy way. So, you know, you might be talking about Elizabeth I at Tilbury, and then you go past the graffiti wall of fame in the same moment. So it's like time is just folding in backwards and forwards, past into present into past constantly, and it's like a rhythm of the book. The rhythm of the kind of waves of the water has become the structure that I'm writing within, and this is a completely new way of writing for me, and it's very freeing. You know, someone who writes historical non-fiction, I've always been really kind of cautious about rules of chronological time. You know, you never go backwards and forwards, you start there and you move. It confuses the reader, where this is there are no rules with this book, and part of the book was this kind of curiosity as well, like what is the Thames Estuary? What is that space? Like, how do you define it? Now, I've interviewed over 50 people and I've asked them all that question, and everyone says something slightly different. So the boundaries of the place are as fluid and as ever shifting and changing as the narrative, as the sandbanks.
But then how do you know, my question then is, in terms of governance, in terms of like, you know, all the pressures on this place, like, you know, Dubai International building London Gateway, or, you know, what's going to happen? They're bound to start doing a barrier, you know.
Yes.
Or when they wanted to put a bridge and just squash Canvey out of the way, and because it is so ambiguous, how does that, you know, how you know, how can that be dealt with? Because it doesn't fit within, you know, the state or the local authorities' vision, or, you know, regeneration planning. Yeah, it just doesn't work. So then how can you deal with that? You know, how can you...
Are you asking me how I'm dealing with it within this book, or are you asking the wider question of...
Wider question, really.
I don't know. I mean, I can only talk in a kind of personal sense. Yeah. For me, this started off as a book, kind of tracking disappearances in a very similar way that you're doing here, kind of gathering these stories of people and trades and traditions that have disappeared from the river. And it very quickly became, and has become, you know, the most political book I've ever written, for sure. That's about all of these kind of burning questions, but particularly about the port. And the thread of that story runs through the entire book. In fact, that probably is the spine of the book, if there is one. You know, kind of questioning that and gathering data, you know, from the guy that does the nature talks on the Broomway, to fishermen like Paul Gilson, to mudlarkers on the other side, you know, all talking about how they believe the dredging in particular is kind of affecting this landscape. Yeah. So that's how I'm dealing with it. And I did go there the other day and had a kind of 4-hour tour around the place with this very nice young corporate environmental officer who's absolutely desperate to persuade me that they were doing lots of good things. He was almost in tears, like how much he wanted me to believe, because he needed to believe it. You know, he needed to believe it. Yeah. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but
well, I think it goes some way towards it. I mean, I think that's why, you know, kind of embedded arts projects here, like your book or this or other ones, are really, you know, they're useful for people, you know, to kind of like think about our memories and what we're doing and gain confidence from it. But I'm kind of really concerned, because I think that the way that the kind of logics of data's put together from computational models means that it rules out all the ambiguity. You know, like, so if you if you map the floor of this place, you think you know it, but you don't know it. You know, if you work out the weather patterns, you think you know it, but you don't know it. You know, because you've got so many different layers of interplay in this commons between species and between atmospheres and between planets. And I think that for me, that's kind of a much bigger picture of what's going on elsewhere. Like when you go and see the doctor with your own health, you know, you're so much more complex than a medical model. Yet, you know, it never gets to that. So that for me is a kind of burning issue of how we deal with the logics that's coming out of computation that feed into governance, whether it's the governance of our internal organs, you know, our teeth, or this estuary. Seems to be like, yeah, so burning issues, you know, in the 21st century, really.